bricks are made? Well, this is one way, the way the Pine Hole Brick and Pipe Company does it. 25,000 fully automated bricks an hour, 250,000 a day. This is one way to make bricks. This is another way, George Black's way. It requires no console with flashing lights, no machinery, no conveyor belt. It requires only a mule hitched up to a mud mill and the sure hands and certain knowledge of a master craftsman. George Black is 92. He made his first brick just this way in the year 1889.
Okay, give me more.
And he is making bricks yet, by hand, just this way. There is something ancient and elemental in this. For what other man can you think of who has made his whole life out of water and earth and fire? It is compelling to watch George Black at work, but come away. Come on a trip around Winston-Salem to see his monuments. The R.J. Reynolds Tobacco Factory.
Yeah, that was pretty brick, ain't they? R.J. Reynolds come out, and the first order was 500,000. And he come back later, they ordered 1 million. We made the brick for that building right there. And then the old work done on the old home church, I made the brick for that. And I made the brick for that building right over there. Then I made the brick for the library.
A wall behind a house.
That's what you call clinkers, you know. See that, them cracks in them, that's what they like.
They make a nice wall, don't they?
Yeah.
How many bricks do you suppose you've made?
Oh my, I couldn't tell. I couldn't tell. If I could see the brick that I've made, I expect I'd get scared of it.
Outside the old city hospital, also made with his bricks, George Black remembered the day 81 years ago when he decided to become a brickmaker. His father had died, and one afternoon, George Black, 11, and his brother, 14, had a talk.
He said, let's learn the trades that would make the most money out at work. So that's what we're going to have to do. So we're not going to get to go to school. They said if we don't go to school, say if we just stand up, hold ourselves up, make men of ourselves. If we don't know A from B, he says, we can make somebody call us Mr. Black someday. So that's what we done.
And now, at 92, Mr. Black cannot take a walk in his hometown without seeing the work of his hands, the bricks he has made one by one for more than 80 years. They are here in this bank, there in that church, there in that school. The cornerstones record more than the construction of buildings. They speak the life of a man.
I understand you can produce 5,000 blocks a day.
Well, yes, I used to.
Well, I hope we teach our chaps to produce as many as that.
I'll make a good brick. I'll make a good brick. My goodness, you can make 1 million brick here quick.
We're mighty proud of you being from Randolph County.
Yeah.
So we had to come and help celebrate your birthday.
I sure remember how you doing. I'm very old. 101. I'll be my next birthday 102.
but I think I can boil it down to 5 minutes and let us all go home. But I must tell it because it's such an instructive story to tell at the National Press Club. It's the story of, see, I never worked here in Washington. This is how I found out how the government works in Washington and how journalism works. We went to cover an on-the-road story in my home state, North Carolina. It was a story about George Black, a brickmaker. Mr. Black had a mud mill that went around, a mule who paced around and around all day and stirred up the mud. Mr. Black, an elderly black man, would take it and pack it into forms expertly. And the result, after he had baked the brick, burnt the bricks, as he said, was beautiful, outsized, handmade bricks, which were much in demand at Williamsburg and Old Salem and other places where they're doing restorations. And many of our stories really were not so great, but this one was terrific. Mr. Black took us around town and showed us this brick church and this schoolhouse and this wall and this walkway. And it slowly dawned on us that he had made the building materials that had built practically that whole city. And he took us out to the R.J. Reynolds tobacco factory, told us how Mr. R.J. Reynolds himself had ridden out on a white horse and asked him if he thought he could make 1,000 bricks. And Mr. Black said yes, he believed he could and did. And there they still stand as a monument to this man's life work. And it was nice, and I was happy with the story. And we put it on the air. And a day or so later, one morning I was sitting on the edge of the motel room bed, trying to wake up, figure out where we would go next. And the phone rang, and it was Marvin Kalb, who is here tonight. He was our State Department correspondent. Well, of course, that was a red-letter day for me right there, getting a phone call from Marvin Kalb. And I'm not kidding. And I said, yes, Marvin, what is it? He said, well, there's a fellow here in the State Department who wants to talk to you. His name is Harvey J. Witherell, and he's on the Guyana desk. I said, I think he is the Guyana desk, probably. And I don't know why he would want to talk to you, but he does, and I wish you would call him and get him off my back. And so I said, well, sure, and I did. And Harvey J. Witherell's voice was just trembling with excitement. He said, I hear you did a story about a brickmaker on the Cronkite News. And I said, yep. And he said, gosh, we have been looking all over this country for a brickmaker. There's the government of Guyana, Forbes Burnham, who's prime minister of the country, has told us that if we want to give them some foreign aid that will really do them some good, send them a brickmaker. He said they have a 5-year plan to just rebuild the country in brick. And they don't want to build a big brick factory, though. They want somebody who can go village to village and show people how it's done. And I said, well, I have just the right man for you, Harvey. But now he is 92 years old. And Harvey J. Witherell said, I don't care how old he is. I think he's the last one. So I gave him Mr. Black's phone number, and next day, official government business. Harvey J. Witherell packed his briefcase here and caught the Piedmont Airlines plane down to Winston-Salem. And they made the best foreign aid deal I've ever heard of. For $1,000, Mr. Black would go to Guyana and take his granddaughter, who is also a brickmaker, and a couple of kids from the neighborhood, and they would go down and do the job for the USA. And Harvey J. Witherell was excited. He had fulfilled his mission. Mr. Black was excited. He had rarely, if ever, been out of the county. And here he was going abroad to represent America and teach what he knew very well. I was excited. I had been the Latin American reporter for CBS and still had credit in the bars down there in Georgetown, Guyana, and I knew that if he went, I would go, and it'd be a chance to see some old friends. And the thing became a pretty big deal. They name everything here, of course. Operation Blackjack is what they named this. And cables flew back and forth between Washington and Georgetown. Somebody, I don't think it was Marvin, but somebody sneaked all those cables out of the State Department for me. and I have them somewhere. It's not another Pentagon Papers case. They were not classified documents, but it was fascinating to me to see what a big thing this was becoming. But somebody higher up, everything has to be reviewed, I guess, and they reviewed this, and somebody said, oh, wait a minute, this man is 92 years old. That's just ridiculous. Way too old to undertake a trip like that, and they just stamped the whole thing canceled. And down it tumbled through the bureaucracy, landed with a thud on Harvey's desk. And he called me this time practically in tears to say, well, they say he's too old, and it's all off. And I said, well, way it goes, Harvey. I liked Harvey J. Witherill. We had become friends. And here he was, one of these bureaucrats the country is always reading about, trembling on the brink of actually doing something. And the whole thing had been shot down. But I said there was a lesson to this windy yarn, and here it comes. This is how Washington works, I think, never having worked here. Mr. Black had been going around Winston-Salem talking. This is also how journalism works. He had been talking about how he was going to go to Guyana. And one of the papers your president writes for now, the Winston-Salem Journal and Sentinel, pretty good local paper, heard about it and went out and did a story and ran it on page 1 with a photograph. Mr. Black is going to Guyana. And the UPI, I guess it was the AP in this case, the AP reads the Winston-Salem Journal. They said, boy, that's a nice story. They ran it nationwide with a wire photo. Mr. Black is going to Guyana. And the Washington Post subscribes to the AP, and they said, gee, that's a nice story. And they ran it in the Washington Post with a picture. This was in the Nixon presidency. And the White House read the Washington Post, as we remember, and somebody over there said, wouldn't it be wonderful if the president would see this man off on his way to Guyana for the State Department? And the timing was just exquisite. The very week that the State Department was canceling the whole thing, the White House was inviting Mr. Black to come to Washington and meet the president on his way to Guyana. Of course, nobody at the White House thought to ask Mr. Black how he was going to get to Washington, so he came on the Greyhound bus, the way people do. And they said, bring your family. He did. He brought 32 of them. And in the meantime, Harvey J. Witherill, sitting there in the wreckage of his dream, noticed on the president's appointment schedule that he saw somewhere that on Wednesday he was going to see George Black, a brickmaker from North Carolina. Of course, that made Harvey feel an awful lot better. And whistling a little tune, he sent his canceled project back up through the bureaucracy with this item attached. And of course, he was right. Immediately, the canceled project became a high priority project. All the wheels that had been running backwards suddenly started running fast forward again. Mr. Black came. They had an argument in the driveway over there. The guard said, oh, no, this is way too many people. And after a while said, I tell you what, we'll let half of you in. And President Nixon said, this is a very nice family you have here, Mr. Black. And Mr. Black said, you know, it's only half of them. The other half are still standing out there in the driveway. And President Nixon, to his credit, said, well, heck, I'll see the other half this afternoon. And so Mr. Black got to see the president, not once but twice. Did go to Guyana, and I did go too, and he ran all the people ragged who thought he was too old. He tired them all out. But the great moment, the moment you all know about, I don't know how it's done now, but in those days they would open the doors of the Oval Office for 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and in would rush these animals, us, the press, to listen and take notes and take photographs. And And some photographer elbowed Harvey J. Witherill right out of the way. Excuse me, buddy, and pushed him aside to get a picture of this. But I have a photograph on my new office wall, that one of those that I treasure the most. It shows President Nixon in the middle and this sea of handsome black faces, Mr. Black, half of Mr. Black's family. And one white face sticking in from the corner like that. Harvey J. Witherill. He got in there and got his picture made. So that was my only experience. About the only one I've had in this city before this experience this evening. Both of them are memories that I cherish. I'm grateful to